I've buried 3 doctors who told me to take it easy. I don't say that to be funny. I say it because it's true, and at 102 years old, I've earned the right to lead with the truth. My name is Harold, and I'm still here. I wake up every morning in the same house I've lived in for nearly 50 years. I make my coffee the same way I always have. I sit in the same chair by the window and watch the light come in slow across the yard. And some mornings, I still reach over to the other side of the table out of habit, just for a second. Then I remember. People ask me all the time how I've done it, how I've made it to 102 without falling apart. They want to know what I eat. They want to know if I walk every day, if I take some kind of supplement, if there's some trick to it. A neighbor's grandson came over last summer with a notepad, actual notepad. Kid was maybe 30 years old, sharp eyes, wanted to write an article about me for some website. He asked me what my diet looked like in my 40s. I told him I ate whatever my wife put on the table and was grateful for it. He laughed. Then he realized I wasn't joking. Here's the thing nobody wants to hear. The food didn't keep me alive. The walking didn't either. Lord knows it wasn't the doctors. What kept me here, what's kept me sitting in this chair, watching the morning light for over 100 years, is something I didn't even understand myself until I was well into my 80s. And by the time I understood it, I'd already spent the better part of 60 years getting it wrong. I've never told anyone the full story. Not my children. Not my closest friend, Raymond, God rest him. Not the pastor who came to visit me every few months in my 90s. There was something I carried for a very long time. Something that sat quiet and heavy, right in the middle of my chest, the way a stone sits at the bottom of a clear river. Everything looks fine from above. But that stone never moved. I'm telling it now because I don't have the luxury of waiting anymore, and because maybe someone out there needs to hear it more than I need to keep holding on to it. The real reason I've lived this long took me about 80 years to understand, and when I finally did, the first thing I felt wasn't relief. It was regret. Not for what happened, but for how long I let it stay buried. For all the years I thought keeping quiet was the same thing as being strong. If you've got a few minutes, I'd like to tell you what I mean by that. I was born in 1922 in a small town in southern Ohio. Not much to it, even then. A main street with a hardware store, a diner, a church that everybody went to, whether they believed or not. The kind of place where everybody knew your father's name before they knew yours. We didn't have much. Most people didn't. But I don't remember feeling poor because nobody around us was doing much better. My mother kept the house clean and warm. My father worked at a mill 6 days a week and came home tired and quiet. That was just life. You worked, you ate, you slept, you got up and did it again. Nobody talked about being happy. Happiness wasn't really the point. Getting through was the point. I was the second of 4 children. My brother Eddie was older, sharp as a tack, and twice as stubborn. My 2 younger sisters were good girls, both of them. We fought the way all kids fight, and loved each other the way people do when they don't have the words for it yet. I met Dorothy when I was 19 years old. She was standing outside the drugstore on a Tuesday afternoon in October, and she was laughing at something her friend had said. I don't even remember what the joke was. I just remember the way she laughed, like she meant it completely, like nothing in the world was going to interrupt that moment for her. I stood there on the sidewalk, probably 10 seconds longer than I should have, just watching. Then she looked over and caught me staring, and instead of looking away, she just raised her eyebrow at me like she was daring me to say something. I married her 2 years later. We built a life the way people built lives back then, slowly, carefully, with whatever materials you had on hand. I got a job working for a plumbing supply company, loading and driving and eventually managing a small crew. It wasn't glamorous work. I came home with dirt under my fingernails most days, but it was honest, and it was steady, and in those days, steady meant everything. Dorothy and I had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. We raised them in a house we bought for less than what a used car costs today. We had a small yard, a vegetable garden that Dorothy tended like it was her life's work, and a neighborhood full of families doing more or less the same thing we were doing. Those years, the 50s and into the 60s, they had a particular feeling to them, a kind of forward motion, like the whole country was building something and you were part of it just by showing up every day. I believed in work. I believed in keeping your word. I believed that a man who provided for his family and kept his troubles to himself was doing right by the world. I believed that for a very long time. I was wrong about the last part, but I didn't know it yet. It was the winter of 1967. I remember it being a particularly cold year, the kind of cold that gets into the walls of a house and stays there no matter how high you turn the heat. Dorothy had been quiet for a few weeks. Not her usual quiet, the comfortable kind we'd settled into after nearly 20 years of marriage. This was different. This was a quiet with something behind it. I noticed, but I didn't ask. That was my way. That was the way of most men I knew. You noticed things, and you filed them away, and you told yourself it would pass. You kept moving. You went to work, you came home, you sat at the dinner table, you watched the news. You kept moving because stopping felt dangerous somehow. Like if you stood still long enough, something would catch up to you. It caught up to me on a Thursday evening in February. Dorothy asked the children to go to their rooms after dinner. Even our oldest, who was 16 by then and thought he was grown. She sat down across from me at the kitchen table, and she folded her hands the way she did when she was trying to stay calm, and she told me she needed to say something. She said she had been unhappy for a long time, not angry, not dramatic about it. Just said it the way you tell someone the weather had changed. Quiet and certain and final sounding. She said she felt like she'd been living next to me for years without really living with me. She said she didn't know who I was anymore, and she wasn't sure I knew either. I sat there and I didn't say a word. I don't know how long this silence lasted. Could have been 30 seconds. Could have been 5 minutes. The refrigerator was humming. I remember that. I remember staring at the grain of the kitchen table and thinking that I should say something, that a man who loved his wife should have something to say in that moment. But I had nothing. I was completely empty. She wasn't asking for a divorce. She wasn't threatening to leave. She was just telling me the truth, the way she always did, direct and without cruelty. And somehow that was worse than if she'd screamed at me, because I knew she was right. That's the part I never told anyone. I knew she was right. I had spent so many years being present in the physical sense, coming home, sitting at the table, fixing what needed fixing, that I had stopped being present in any way that actually mattered. I had confused showing up with being there. And the worst part, the part that kept me awake that night and for many nights after, was realizing that I didn't know how to be any different. I wanted to tell her that. I wanted to say I know, and I'm sorry, and I don't know how to fix it, but I want to. Instead, I told her I was tired, and I went to bed. That silence was the beginning of something I would carry for the next 60 years. The years after that February night didn't look broken from the outside. That's the thing nobody tells you about a quiet kind of damage. It doesn't announce itself. The lawn still gets mowed. The bills still get paid. You still show up to your son's baseball games and your daughter's school play. And you still sit in the same pew at church on Sunday morning. From the outside, the Alderman family was doing just fine. But Dorothy and I had shifted. Not apart exactly. More like two pieces of furniture that had been moved just slightly out of place. Everything still fit in the room. But if you knew where things used to be, you could see it. The gap was small, but it was always there. We never had another conversation like that Thursday night in February. I told myself that meant things had gotten better. I know now that it just meant we had both gotten quieter. She kept her garden, I kept my work. The children grew up and moved out one by one, and suddenly the house that had always felt a little too small felt too big for the two of us. And in that extra space, the silence between us got louder somehow. There were nights I'd sit in the living room after she'd gone to bed, and I'd think about that conversation, about what she said and what I didn't say back. I'd turn it over in my mind, the way you turn a stone over in your hand, looking at every side of it. And every time I'd come back to the same place. I should have talked to her. Not that night, maybe. Maybe I was too stunned that night. But the next day, or the day after that, I should have sat down with her and said, "Dorothy, I heard you. Tell me more." But I never did. I came close once. It was maybe 1974 or thereabouts. We were sitting on the back porch one evening in July, and the light was going gold the way it does in summer. And she looked over at me and smiled, just a small, tired smile. And I felt something open up in my chest. I had the words right there. I could feel them. And I opened my mouth and I said, "You want some more iced tea?" She said, "Sure." And that was that. I've thought about that moment more times than I can count. That small window that opened and closed in about 4 seconds. What might have been different if I'd said what I actually meant to say? Whether she would have cried or laughed or reached over and taken my hand. I'll never know. Dorothy passed in 1999. Pneumonia, which turned into complications, which turned into a goodbye that came faster than any of us were ready for. She died knowing I loved her, but she died not knowing how sorry I was. And that is the weight I carried every single day for the 25 years since. That is the stone that never moved. Grief does something strange to time. After Dorothy passed, the years moved differently. Not slower exactly, but thinner somehow. Like the days had less substance to them. My children called regularly, visited when they could. My grandchildren came around and filled the house with noise the way children do, and I was grateful for it. But when they left and the house went quiet again, it was a particular kind of quiet that I don't have a good word for. I kept living the way I'd always lived. Got up, made coffee, sat in my chair. But somewhere in those years after she was gone, I started doing something I'd never really done before. I started thinking. Not the practical kind of thinking, not making lists or solving problems. The kind where you sit still long enough that the things you've been outrunning finally catch up and sit down across from you. I was in my mid-80s when something began to shift. It wasn't a single moment. It was more like a slow thaw, the way a field looks in early March when the frost is finally letting go. I started to see my life not as a series of things that happened to me, but as a series of choices I had made, small ones mostly. The choice to stay quiet when I should have spoken. The choice to show up in body when I was somewhere else entirely in my mind. The choice, again and again over decades, to protect myself from discomfort by saying nothing. I had called that strength my whole life. Sitting in my chair at 86 years old, I finally had to admit it wasn't strength at all. It was fear, plain and simple. Afraid that if Dorothy really knew the whole of me, the uncertain parts, the parts that didn't know what they were doing, she might love me less. So I kept those parts hidden, and in hiding them, I kept her at a distance without ever meaning to. That realization didn't come with any drama, no lightning bolt, no tears, just a quiet morning and a cup of coffee, and the sudden, clear understanding that I had spent my marriage protecting an image of myself instead of offering my actual self. And that Dorothy, who was one of the finest people I ever knew, deserved better than an image. I carried regret about that. I still do. Not the kind that eats you alive, but the honest kind. The kind that sits with you and reminds you of what mattered. But something else came with it. Something I didn't expect. A kind of peace. Not because the regret went away, but because I finally stopped pretending it wasn't there. I looked straight at it. And in naming it, it lost some of its power over me. I think that's what kept me alive all these years. Not the coffee or the routine or whatever else people want to credit. It was the unfinished business. The truth I hadn't fully told yet. Something in me, some stubborn, quiet part, knew I wasn't done yet. And here I am. So here is what I want to say to you. Not as someone who has all the answers. Lord knows I spent most of my life proving I didn't. But as someone who has had a long time to think about it, longer than most people get, I want to say this as plainly as I know how. Don't wait. Whatever it is you're carrying right now, whatever sits quiet and heavy in the middle of your chest, don't make the mistake I made. Don't file it away and tell yourself you'll come back to it when things settle down. Things don't settle down. Life doesn't clear a path for the conversations you keep putting off. It just keeps moving. And one day you look up and 30 years have gone by. And the person you needed to say it to is no longer there to hear it. I know how it feels to tell yourself that silence is the responsible choice, that keeping the peace matters more than telling the truth. I know how easy it is to convince yourself that the people you love are better off not knowing the uncertain, unfinished parts of you. I believed all of that. I believed it so completely and for so long that I didn't even recognize it as a choice anymore. It just felt like who I was. But it was a choice. It's always a choice. If you are 40 years old right now, or 50, or 60, you still have time. Not unlimited time, nobody gets that. But you have time. Use it differently than I did. Sit down with the people you love and say the things that are actually true. Not the comfortable version. The real version. It won't always go smoothly. Sometimes it'll be awkward and hard, and you'll wish you'd kept your mouth shut. But you won't regret it the way you'll regret the silence. I can promise you that from 102 years of living. Love is not about being perfect together. It's about being honest together. That took me the better part of a century to understand, and I'm still a little embarrassed about how long it took. Call your people, not to check in, not to make plans, but to actually say what you mean. Tell your wife or your husband what you love about them. Tell your children the things you're proud of and the things you're sorry for. Tell your friends what their friendship has meant. Do it now, while the words are still yours to give. Dorothy would have listened. I know that now in a way I couldn't let myself know when she was alive. She would have listened, and she would have understood, and we might have had something even fuller than what we had. That's the only thing I'd go back and change. Not the hard times, just the silence. The secret to living a long life isn't what you eat or how far you walk. It's finishing what you need to say before it's too late.